I am going to embark on a new series for everybody, and I'm willing to take your questions as they stream in as we go along. The new series is going to be about masculine and feminine instincts, an idea or a terminology I first coined in 2009 and started doing lectures about around the world. Actually, it won't be something unusual to Jungian psychologists because they have used the term archetypes for a very long time, 100 years or so. But we're going to begin today looking at the first instinct we'll cover, and it's going to be a masculine instinct. Next time we'll do a feminine instinct. But today's masculine instinct is going to be the Zeus instinct. Um, One of the things that caused me to start lecturing 2 decades ago about the topic of masculine and feminine instincts is that in the area of romance and dating, I saw a lot of problems starting to brew, and they have, reached their pinnacle today as far as the two sexes not getting along very well. And I think that's largely in part because of not understanding the difference between what is a masculine instinct, what is a feminine instinct. They're very different, and yet they work hand in hand, certainly in romance, but also in the workplace, the family, the home, and society at large. So that's really a root cause of a lot of the turmoil going on today, um, including the political discord. It almost seems the two political parties have polarized into male and female, to my mindset. So, uh, why don't we start with what is an what is a masculine or feminine instinct? Certainly, you're familiar with the term instinct. Um, the idea that a large cat appears behind you on a hike, and you run or you climb a tree. That I would call that a survival instinct. You've heard of reflexes as well. They're very similar. These are automatic behaviors that occur without you having to think with what has been called your higher brain, or Freud called it the conscious mind. The triune brain model, by the way, I think is essential to understanding any other um, psychologies or theories within psychology. So an instinct happens automatically. If you think of the term evolution, and if you think of Charles Darwin and his idea that for a species and a creature um, to go on, they have to survive long enough to reproduce. It's that simple. So there's a survival aspect and a reproduction aspect to anything evolutionary. So evolutionary psychology kind of puts a cap on all other theories by way of explaining in the modern day what instincts are and how they work. Because if you get down, to the root of it, evolutionary psychology really is about instincts. It's a psychology of instincts. And if Darwin said that the two variables are survival and reproduction, then there must be survival instincts shared by both biologic sexes and reproductive instincts that are unique to each sex. This also means that the instincts unique to each sex don't only have to be used in purposes of attraction, dating, courtship, romance, and commitment and marriage. They can be used for anything. And it's what you see everywhere in the workplace, in politics, in any kind of public discussion. You'll see a little unique flavor in what males pursue and how they communicate, and what females pursue and how they communicate. and it explains what you see when you suspect intuitively that there are differences between the two sexes. So, a friend and colleague of mine, John Barry, a few years ago, I would say 8 or 9 years ago, did the first research studies showing that there are indeed what he at that time called male archetypes, but we all know the real world. In the real world, they would be called instincts. Archetypes are a terminology used by Carl Jung, and they're kind of hard to wrap your mind around. What exactly did he mean by archetypes? He was very much into literature, as I am as well, but the term archetype probably would not be used in common conversation today, but it just means an instinct. It means something that automatically happens, that has happened throughout all cultures, throughout history. So back to my friend and colleague, Dr. John Barry. He wrote a book with Martin Seeger, Dr. Martin Seeger, and Roger Kingersley, and others 8 or 9 years ago, called The Palgrave Guide to Male Psychology. And what he included in that textbook on male psychology was that there are three proven, what he calls archetypes, but they amount to instincts in males. And he listed them as being a protector and provider, fighting to win. That doesn't mean killing, but you could call it the killer instinct, using slang. Or when you hear of someone making a killing, they didn't kill somebody, they made a lot of money. So they acquired something of value. And then finally, maybe surprising to many, an instinct to not share emotions publicly would be the way I'd put it. An instinct for privacy and isolation, solace in the male, so that the male can tap into the unconscious. Well, it turns out that 2 decades prior to this research, and I've been waiting for the research to be done because I myself am not a trained financed researcher. I wish I were 2 decades ago, but that was not the way my life went. So I was waiting for others to catch up and actually do the bench science research on this. And the first person to do it was Dr. John Barry. And he's just a great guy and a good friend to me. So I recommend any therapist out there, any practitioner of psychology, they ought to get his textbook. And it comes in many forms. It's hardbound. I don't think softbound, but you can get it as a PDF, ebook, and so forth. So it's well worthwhile. So my point with that was that, I named these concepts first, and waited for the research to come out to start proving them. And there are only three so far. So I am certain that there are going to be 24 or more in the future that are not discovered, but uncovered or proven to be valid. Male and female instincts. All right. So what an instinct does is, and I see some questions coming in. Yeah. Okay. Um, what an instinct does for a male or a female, what they have in common are the survival instincts. So the instinct to fight or flee or freeze. We all know that one. Fight or flight instinct, shared by males and females. That's a survival instinct. Or the instinct to pursue food, to eat when you're hungry. Um, the instinct to, this is a good one. The word disgust. Um, some psychologists like to consider disgust an emotion. I do not believe it is. It's not an emotion, it's a reflex. It's a response to that which is dangerous or deadly or diseased. That's what causes disgust. You don't have to feel disgust, you react in disgust automatically. It's in your body. So these are examples of survival instincts, but males and females have very different, you could call them gender instincts, um, masculine instincts and feminine instincts, and they're different from each other, and yet they are analogous. For a male or a female, they accomplish a similar goal, and yet in a very different style or way. And this is why I long ago turned to the Greeks and Greek mythology to understand them in a similar way that Jung liked myths and folklore and mythology, to tap it for that which is universal in humans. So make this connection. If a story lasts hundreds of years or thousands of years, this is a Jungian concept. If it lasts hundreds of years or thousands of years and is durable and retold and reworked, such as through Shakespeare, at the root of whose plays, there's always one or two Greek myths that is the basis for a Shakespearean play. And then you look to modern cinema, which has endless varieties of retold stories that are, in essence, if they are stunningly brilliant, based somehow in a Shakespearean concept and based somehow in an ancient Greek mythologic concept. That's what makes them good stories. Then that implies, because they last, these stories, that there is something universal to the story and to the characters. Well, what is the one thing that is universal to humans? No matter who you are as a human, you have this thing. It's an instinct, at least the survival instinct. Humans want to survive. Every creature wants to survive. So we have that in common. And so the same is true of being male or female. And the most durable, lasting commonalities that are true of all males and true of all females is that all males have these masculine instinctual tendencies in their behavior to greater or lesser degrees. Of course, it's on a bell curve. Bell curves are real, they exist. And so I'm talking about the average, the median of the bell curve. I'm not talking about extreme outliers, 3 standard deviations up or down. We have to have averages and bell curves in psychology. Otherwise, we have nothing to talk about. There is no science to what we're talking about then. It's all opinion based. So, on average, males have throughout the world, in every culture of the world today, and I'm quoting Dr. John Barry, and probably throughout human history, and I don't need to quote him, um, in that I can say that Greek literature exists, and they clearly understood human behavior, and they codified it into stories that were universal and last to today, and are you may not like uh, watching about Greek myths, or you probably have not read the Iliad or the Odyssey, and it could be boring to you in its language, but you absolutely have seen cinema, which is a replay of something from Shakespeare, if it's award winning. And Shakespeare is entirely based in Greek myths, at least in its themes and plots. So it all goes back to the ancient Greeks. So any story you like watching today on television or in the movies somehow goes back to the Greek myths. and the characters go back to the Greek deities. So there were numerous deities. Um, John Barry, in his landmark research, establishes again the provider protector instinct, number one. Secondly, fighting to win is number two in males. And thirdly, is not showing your emotions publicly. To my mind, that means being stoic, being a stoicist in a way. The nomenclature that I gave to these three things that I expected to be proven someday, and now they have, goes back to 2009. And the name I gave the first instinct, being a protector provider, is Zeus, the Zeus instinct. Zeus was the chief god in cohort with Hera, his wife, on Mount Olympus. And they ruled the earth and the other gods, and they set the rules. And they were the co-CEOs of Mount Olympus. Zeus is the ultimate protector provider. Number two, fighting to win, I labeled in 2009 the Ares instinct. And the Ares instinct is because Ares is the Greek god of war. He has a sister, Athena, who is the female Greek god of war, the goddess of war. The idea being fighting to win, having a killer instinct, which usually in today's world means being able to make money and to be dominant, not in a bad way, but in a leadership way, to be the most respected for one's drive forward. And then thirdly, John Barry's instinct to not reveal the emotions publicly, to control one's own emotions. I call the Hades instinct. Hades was the god of the underworld to the ancient Greeks. And anytime the underworld is referred to, it implies the unconscious. So it is a male turning inward. You could imagine when there were newspapers back in the day, the husband reading the newspaper, lost in it, while others are trying to talk to him, but he's reading this newspaper. He's lost in it. That's the Hades instinct. He's turning inward to revive himself, to invigorate himself by learning and pondering, thinking, plotting, strategizing. If you've ever seen an action movie with a male action hero, there usually is a part to the plot where he needs to retreat to some safe place and turn inward and strategize and make plans for how he is going to win the day and then come back out. Or the man retreating to a cave, or being in the belly of the whale. Any of these metaphoric terms and phrases for isolating and achieving privacy for the purpose of recentering oneself and strategizing and planning using some creativity. And the unconscious oftentimes is termed the place of our creativity, where we draw from creativity, from the underworld, the unconscious. That is what the man is doing when he's using this Hades instinct. Each of these instincts also has a modern day superhero analog. So, for example, the Zeus is basically Superman, the all-powerful chief god to the ancient Greeks, that can save anything, anywhere, and have unlimited power. That's the Zeus. The second one, Ares, a modern day equivalent would be any military based superhero or hunter killer kind of superhero. So the Hulk fits the analogy. Craven the Hunter fits the analogy. Um, Anyone with brute force, like a ninja, fits the analogy of the Aries instinct. Now, the Hades instinct implies a big stress placed upon the domicile, the retreat of the person. And so I think of Batman when I think of the Hades instinct. So modern superheroes are just, you know, revivified Greek gods and given new stories that are more modernized for us. So you see how enduring and durable these concepts are. So what I predict in coming years, in the next decade, is that folks like Dr. John Barry and Roger Kingersley and Martin Seeger are going to uncover proof by sampling all world cultures, because what eliminates sociology and all its opinion-based wishful thinking about what is true is if something is true of all world cultures. If there are vast differences between cultures, then sociology explains that. It's because of the differences in the culture. But if it is true of all cultures, and even seen throughout human history, then sociology doesn't matter. And what you end up with is pure psychology that is enduring and true over time for humans. So I predict that there is going to be future discoveries of male instincts for what I call the Apollo instinct. And we're going to cover these approximately each week. I'll go over one of them. The Apollo instinct would be something similar to saying a man is a Renaissance man, kind of like a Tony Stark or Elon Musk, somebody who is very intellectually bright and learned at numerous disciplines and is an avid learner, a student for life. So the Apollo instinct. So when males learn something, that empowers their sense of masculinity. The same was true of the Zeus instinct I talked about. When a male provides income for the family or the community, he feels great about himself. When he protects the woman in his life or his children or his community, he feels great about himself. Provide and protect. So the Zeus instinct is an expression of masculinity, but its implementation raises the masculinity. Um, the Aries instinct, winning, fighting for something you believe in, fighting for the business you want to create, fighting for the career or job you want, fighting for the woman you want, fighting to defend her, or fighting to win her over to like you. That's the Aries instinct. Fighting for a goal. It means aggressively pursuing a goal and winning. Therefore, that's the Aries instinct. The Hades instinct is having the boundaries to shut out the world and go inside your privacy and your unconscious and your creativity to envision something new for your life, or to envision the solution to a problem, or to envision the path to a goal. It's the workshop of the mind. It's where you have to go to retreat and plan, and it must be safe and secure for you. That's the Hades instinct. And when you do that, you feel rejuvenated as a man. You feel more masculine. The same will be true of all these other Greek deities that form my nomenclature for the masculine and feminine instincts that we all know and feel exist because we live them and we implement them. But there will be research eventually that will come out to prove they exist, that they are real. that they aren't learned somehow, passed on from generation to generation, and then performed like an actor. Right. That's sociology ideas there. Performative masculinity um, is not true. It's inborn, biological, inherited throughout all cultures of the world and throughout all human history. So next time we are going to cover the Zeus instinct, and I want to say a few more things about instincts and what they mean. Um, Freud had a term he called libido. So here's another odd word that doesn't naturally roll off the tongue. Um, Today, it has transformed and been disfigured into some sort of like sexual appetite or something, one's libido. But libido to Freud meant life force, almost like Luke Skywalker and the Force, having the Force. Um, it basically means feeling alive, being viable, and being charismatic, having charisma and excitement. It's like you wake up in the morning, you're excited to be alive. That's libido. Well, libido was a generalized term he was using for both males and females. But the term that is most specific for libido, life force, vitality in a male is masculinity itself. The term for libido in a female, life force, excited to be alive, is femininity. So, and femininity does not mean some kind of trite expression of, being flirtatious or something. It means all the things that are unique to being a woman, an adult woman, or a girl yet to be developed, that are uniquely female in behavior. And we're going to cover those as well in the feminine instincts. So Freud's term libido is one and the same as what we have all called masculinity for males or femininity for females. When we look at it as this overall energy of life, it's a kind of a generalized term to say the more masculinity a male has, we could say the more alive he is, at least psychologically. The more femininity a female has, the more alive she is, at least psychologically. So that's one way of seeing masculinity and femininity. But the other way is to also recognize that within masculinity, in its energy of life, these instincts, these specific 24 to 30 plus instincts that one can find within Greek literature, within Greek mythology, at least as nomenclature, they figured it all out. They saw every aspect of human behavior and codified it into these singular behaviors unique to males and females. So they helped us to be able to name these things instead of just saying protector, provider, or fighting to win instinct, which is easily forgotten. Um, it's more memorable to see them as characters and as deities, and not actual deities, but the divinity in humans, the power, the superpowers in humans, the superhero nature of humans. It rests in the specific nature of each of these instincts that we have. And we're not born familiar with them and how they work. They are unconscious. The psychoanalysts have always studied how to make the unconscious conscious for the patient, for the analysand. Um, and that's, in a way, what we're doing here. It's evolutionary psychoanalysis. in essence, to use these in this way. I think trauma is not the entirety of this practice, of this philosophy or idea, but it's important. It's an important feature because all humans have suffered disappointments, setbacks, and actual traumas. So the way I would define trauma literally is that two things have happened. No, three things have happened. A boundary has been violated. Number one, their boundary. Number two, negative emotion has been experienced by the person and inserted into the person by stress. Stress outside your boundary, we call stress. Stress that has gotten inside your boundary has now produced negative emotions. And we call those depressive or anxiety emotions. Thus, PTSD, post traumatic stress disorder. Stress is crucial. But thirdly, the instincts have been violated, impeded, impaired, blocked, suppressed, diminished in use or power. And guess what word I believe applies to that? I think it's definitive of the word. It's shame. You know, people like talking about shame as if it's similar to guilt and you feel bad about yourself. Basically, it just in the common parlance, it just means you feel bad about yourself. Well, that's really vague and maybe not that useful to wrap our minds around and make use of. What if we define shame as a violation, blocking, diminishing, um, subduing, or some other synonym of the masculine instincts in a male or the feminine instincts in a female? In other words, a suppression or diminishment of the masculinity is what shame exactly is in a male. And a suppression of the femininity in a female, or a blocking, damping, tamping, lowering, diminishing of the femininity of a female, is shame to a female. Now, for Freud, a word for masculine shame was castration, a brutal term to use, but he used the term castration. Today, we might say emasculinization or emasculinization. Freud, in his time, he had strange words and phrases he used, but this is never ever used anymore today. But a phrase he used for what I think he was intending to be shame in a woman was the phrase penis envy. That even that still makes it male centric, which is wrong, but it's what he meant. He was trying to come up with a phrase for what describes feminine shame. Now, we know from numerous other researchers that um, males feel shame generally for being one-upped, for being diminished, for being blocked in their goals, in their life course. Females tend to feel more shamed from being banished, like in the film Mean Girls. Like there's a clique of girls that exclude another female, and that feels terrible, feels shameful. So feeling like you don't belong. But both go back to evolutionary um, terminologies and evolutionary science, in that if a male is one upped by other males, then he's, beta male, omega male. He's the lowest male, and he's not a very good fighter or hunter, which is bad for the whole species. And for a female, being banished could have meant death, because you don't have access to resources of the village if you're excluded from the village. But these are generalities that do kind of sum up the nature of the male and the female and their shame. But I truly believe that there is a much richer deeper refined way of looking at both, where we could look at every masculine instinct and learn about it. And if it is blocked, suppressed, diminished, deleted, depleted in some way, that exact source of shame could be healed. Same thing for females. If each of their feminine instincts, the Hera, what I believe will be uncovered, researched, the Hera instinct for mothering, the maternal nature of all females, the Hestia instinct for friendship and house and home, really wanting to have the right conditions in house and home and friendship, Hestia, the Athena, the Artemis, the Io. You go into like all kinds of mythologic characters. The Ariadne instinct. There are so many instincts that we can go into, each one of which is the exact targeted pain point where one feels shame because of some interpersonal interaction that harmed that specific instinct. So, back to trauma. The third element of trauma, I believe, a trauma is not a trauma unless shame is also inflicted on the victim of the trauma. Otherwise, it's just an annoyance or a blockage or a frustration. It's not a trauma. What makes a trauma is not just boundary has been violated, negative emotions are felt, which are depressive or anxious, but it's got to have this third element, or it's not a trauma at all. Shame. And I would define shame as diminishment, depletion, harm to, blocking of either a masculine instinct in a male or a feminine instinct in a female, or multiple ones. And using EMDR, which I have long ago, after I was trained at it, I've had 1,000 patients for it at least back in the day. I never saw it fail. I never saw it not work. And it's a pretty miraculous treatment, I think, for trauma. I would propose that a new version of EMDR be developed, which I am working on, that targets these specific shame points, which are going to always, always relate to almost precisely to the stories of one of the Greek deities, and therefore refer to one of the masculine or feminine instincts that have been harmed. And if you go straight there to labeling the traumas as shame and label them with the correct injured instinct, then the EMDR will be highly targeted and potent at processing the trauma and healing the person very specifically, instead of taking a long time to get to it. So I'll just end with this. In my concept of evolutionary psychoanalysis as a new model of therapy based on these instincts, I would say that one extra element is needed to be brought in to the model to make it complete and make sense. And that is the anthropology idea of uh, um, initiation. Ancient tribes and Aboriginal tribes, some of them today, may still have initiation rituals for boys and girls where they're led to believe that they might die although they never were going to. The village elders were presiding over everything, watching over everything to make sure it's safe. But the idea was to let them experience feeling like they could die. And what it did is, and it was formalized, it was a formalized ritual, a cultural um, tradition to do this for boys and girls, to give them entry to adulthood that has a marked date, and they're given a new name, an adult name. They're given a new set of responsibilities that are adult man or woman responsibilities. And there had to be this marking point where they had to go through this ritual of basically facing death. And if you face death and win, what else could you fear emotionally? Nothing. There's nothing else in life you could fear more than death itself. And if you have faced death and won, which is what initiation does, then you are free to be confident and courageous in your adult life and your adult behavior. But that's just the emotional part. The instinctual part is quite interesting too, because when faced with death, you must draw from within yourself behaviors and skills you may have not known you had until this point of being a survivalist for a brief time. I think that initiation rituals also drew out automatically 2 or 3 or 4 of the masculine instincts that the boy was unaware of. He had to use them quickly to survive. And the instincts in the female had to be drawn out and used to survive the trial of undergoing initiation into adulthood. Although females are traditionally and psychologically more organic in their personal growth, and this is evidenced even in pregnancy. The process of pregnancy is organic, natural, and it happens on its own, where the woman is spurred into learning things quickly surrounding having a child. And that's the organic way that they go through initiation, whereas males will often go through some sort of conflict, confrontational, aggressive, deadly, physically deadly thing. Although pregnancy used to be potentially very deadly to the female. So my point with this is that all traumas are violations of an instinct, masculine or feminine instinct, or several, which produces shame. And a trauma isn't a trauma without shame, without negative emotion, a different thing from shame. Shame is like to the body level, what I would call the reptilian brain level. Freud called it the unconscious. Emotions are not unconscious. You have them, you're aware of them. There's that too. And then in a higher brain sense, a conscious intellectual sense, boundaries have been violated. That's the basis of law. All legal violations are boundary violations of some sort. So evolutionary psychoanalysis would add to what has come before by recognizing that there are masculine and feminine instincts, that they are at the root of all traumas, which we all have, which cause our neuroses and our difficulties. And that having a better life can't ignore the fact that these instincts exist. And we're finally at a place, I think, in our society where we can at least openly talk about them existing. And we know they do. The Greeks did. The ancient philosophers, Aristotle knew. Shakespeare definitely knew. Every dramatist after Shakespeare knew. And every modern cinematic master knows that masculine and feminine instincts exist. And every consumer spending analyst knows they exist. And it's very important that they know because they're going to lose money and not be accurate with their data based on spending. Spending is very impulsive at times and instinct driven. You buy without thinking much of the time. So, most certainly to economists, masculine and feminine instincts exist. You can read about that in a friend of mine um, who wrote a book. Jeff Jeffrey Miller wrote the book Spent, which is about differences between males and females in spending. Basically, proves that there are instincts that are masculine and feminine as well. So, all right, thank you for joining. Next time we meet, we're going to talk about the Zeus, what I call the Zeus instinct, or have called it since 2009, um, and all of its uses and how it's used in the workplace, in romance, love, dating, etc., within families. And we can do that for each of these instincts. Somebody says, can you speak to the next gen, what they call Gen Alpha, because it's saying it's looking more like the betas. Yeah. Okay. What this person means, I'll just answer that one question. Seems to be the prominent one. Um, yeah. Gen Alpha being called beta, less than, not very masculine. I think you're talking about males, perhaps. It's simply that our culture for a few decades now has not we've never had initiation, which I mentioned. And by the way, I believe going through trauma treatment, EMDR, is like a modern initiation. Why? Because it corrects those instincts. It makes you face what felt deadly. It felt deadly, whatever you faced. And that's an initiation. So EMDR is an initiation into adult manhood or adult womanhood. But I digress. The reason that Gen Alpha is less masculine, I think is what you're saying, is that the culture has not taught boys these instincts that they exist. It denied they exist, that males and females are exactly the same. We might as well be robots. We don't have different instincts. Therefore, they never learned these instincts. Therefore, they feel shame. Therefore, they don't uh, produce, provide, protect, fight. They don't fight. Um, they don't care to win. And pretty much all they do is they use the Hades instinct, I think. They go inside their heads, play video games, and do nothing. Just go unconscious. Yeah. So that's why it's the culture is at fault, not biology or psychology. It's the culture that caused that. But what culture can't do is delete biology and its instinctual tendencies. Those will always exist for another 100, 200,000 years, unchanged, no matter how advanced we get with technology or AI or whatever. Those are going to be there for males and females. And love will remain the same. Real love will remain the way it always has been. And it'll be more and more rare. It is more and more rare today, from what I understand. So, large part of my life has been devoted to trying to fix that problem, the lack of love between men and women. All right. Well, thank you for your question. If anyone has a personal question that they would like me to answer in a Q&A, I will be willing to do that. If you send me a 500 word or less uh, instant message in Substack. I will consider them on almost a weekly basis to do as a Q&A. And I'll be proceeding with this series as we go along. Thank you. Thanks for joining.